Hello, this is Dr. Flight, and this video or PowerPoint lecture will be focused on planning for marketing and nonprofit. Specifically, what we're going to look at in this take here is an overview or a framework of planning within the organization for marketing. So there'll be a broad overall framework that we look at specifically, and then we're going to spend some time looking at the overall mission, objectives, and goals of the organization from a marketing planning perspective. So this segment then looks at planning from a very broad perspective, from an organizational level perspective, and again also provides the framework for planning marketing for the entire organization. Let me know if you have any questions, and I appreciate you taking a look at this and following along. Thanks. Great. So what we're going to do is begin by thinking about the role that marketing plays within the organization and the overall goal that marketing has. And if you'll remember, the role or purpose of marketing for really any organization is to plan some form of influence on behavior. So the idea is we want to motivate specific audiences to behave in a certain way or change a behavior or maybe buy a product or adopt a habit that we feel we want to try to influence, and so that's the overall goal. The challenge though with nonprofits in particular, more so than for-profits, is that they are looking to influence multiple audiences at the same time. Oftentimes there's some type of a focal client or group of either objects or individuals that the desire is to influence how they behave and the impact on them. At the same time, though, the organization, of nonprofit organization, needs to raise funds. So there's funding sources, and those would be points of influence for people or organizations that need to be influenced. And then finally, oftentimes nonprofits have some type of philanthropic outreach where we need volunteers to help as well. So those would be examples of three distinct audiences for whom we're trying to influence behavior, and that each of these three needs specific plans in order to do so. So what we need to do is move forward with some type of a coordinated approach where we want to reach the appropriate audiences and we want to motivate them to behave the way with the influence that we want to have them behave in. So reaching the proper audiences and motivating them is how we actually do a lot of the marketing efforts that we have. However, they need to be planned in an organized way. So the organizational marketing planning process then is kind of a broader framework that helps us do exactly that. Moving forward, we'll look at three kind of perspectives, or three elements, if you will, or stages of the organizational planning process. We'll think of it as organizational, strategic, and functional. So organizational or a broad analysis happens from the organizational level. So CMOs, CEOs, the board of directors think of the planning process from a broad organizational level. And then we start to think about how we're going to operate and plan from a strategic perspective. So again, marketing we would want to be involved in thinking about maybe specific markets that we're going to try to reach, products that we're going to use, services we're going to provide, integrating plans together across the organization in a strategic way. And then finally, we want to plan the implementation of our actual business activities or marketing activities that we're going to do. So this framework then thinks of the organizational planning process as happening at three different levels. going from a broad perspective to a narrow perspective, and that would be going from 1, 2 to 3, from a broad analysis of the organization to an implementation stage, necessitating, again, a broad to narrow perspective, also a long to short time horizon. So if we're planning for the organization in a broad analysis, then we're thinking about 3, 5, 10 years period of time into the future and how that's going to look. If we're planning for the organization at the implementation stage, the number 3 stage, then we're thinking about how the organization is going to operate maybe this month or this quarter, so the time perspective is much shorter. Finally, the third thing to remember here is that from the broad analysis, we're often looking outside the firm at big environmental kind of elements here that we find we have to do business in. So it's oftentimes much more of an external kind of view or perspective in the broad analysis. But then when we get to the number 3, the implementation stage, we're very focused on what we're doing operationally, internally, in order to make the plan work. So 3 separate stages outline this framework of planning for the organization, and there are 3 keys to remember about the 3 different stages. There's a broad to narrow scope, a long to short time horizon, and then finally an external to internal perspective. So as we look at these in a little bit more detail, we're going to spend today in this particular segment focused on the broad analysis, and we can kind of, again, look at these in separate pieces. So the broad analysis, strategic phase, and then implementation phase. The broad analysis, again, is more on the organizational level, and we focus a lot on the environment, while in the number 2, in the middle area, in the strategic element, we're thinking about what we call core marketing strategy. So there's a lot of different strategies we can use to view our markets, our audiences. Growth strategies, for instance, come out of this area. Also, strategies about competition come out of this area a lot of times too. Positioning products, doing target marketing, doing segmenting, doing branding. Those are all things that we do in the core marketing strategy area. The final area then, the strategic marketing mix, would involve thinking about the 4 Ps and how you're specifically going to price a product or a service, for instance, or how it's going to be delivered or how it's going to be communicated. These individual plans that we develop are what we call the marketing mix strategy, and that's very much a part of the implementation stage. So again, number 1, the broad analysis, we look at mission, objectives, goals, and the broader overall organizational strategy. In the strategic core marketing strategy area, we look at segmenting, targeting, positioning, things of that nature. And then when we get into the marketing mix strategy, we focus more on pricing and product awareness and things of that nature. But as I mentioned, today in this segment, what we're going to focus on is primarily the first broad analysis element here. And more specifically, what we'll end up talking more about is the mission, objectives, and goals of the organization. So when we think about mission, it's the basic purpose of the organization. It's what it is and what it's trying to accomplish specifically. If we were going to define objectives, we'd think of objectives as major elements that the organization is going to place emphasis on. So it may not be a specific measurable goal, for instance, but it's a broader term that the organization wants to have an impact on. And here are some examples like social impact, market share, revenue growth, reputation, brand equity, things like that are more broadly stated would be ideas of objectives that the organization may want to emphasize or work towards. Goals, on the other hand, translate objectives into specific benchmarks with respect to magnitude, time, and responsibility. So in other words, we have, say, for instance, a goal of impacting having greater social impact, but that's the objective. Now the goal may be we want to impact 20,000 people, or we want to impact we want to influence the rate of the flu virus in its decline, and so we can measure that, for instance, from period to period. Okay, so goals then specify and they make into a measurable account objectives. Objectives are major elements the organization wants to pursue, while as a mission is its basic purpose, and it's a generalized statement of what the organization seeks to accomplish. Okay, so that leads us into a little bit more discussion from each of these areas. And again, so mission, objective, goals. We're talking about the broad analysis in this section here. We'll have other segments where we talk about environmental analysis and stuff like that. But we're going to just today focus on mission, objectives, and goals in this video segment. So when we talk about a mission, we talk about what the purpose is of the organization, who the target audiences are, and generally speaking, what type of value you're going to provide to the organization overall. These tend to be in either one sentence or short paragraph form. They tend to not focus on specifics, but focus on generalities as an overall purpose, or as an overall kind of statement, if you will. So when missions are made, they're often colorful things that people can wrap their minds around. They should, generally speaking, be feasible, but most importantly, motivating, and we also want them to be distinctive. So what does this organization do? Or how does it set itself apart, for instance, than others? We need them to be motivating, though, so that employees can wrap their minds around it, donors can get behind it. It can be visual and colorful as well. Should not, however, be a list of the things that the organization does. So it shouldn't be like we will do X, Y, and Z, because that's often limiting in terms of the overall growth of the organization. Also, it shouldn't be too vague, too ambiguous, or too pithy, if you will, in terms of airiness, or just, again, vagueness, and things like that. We can look some examples of organizational missions. So Mothers Against Drunk Driving, MAD, its mission is simply to stop drunk driving, support the victims of this violent crime, and prevent underage drinking. Okay, so again, these are broad, general statements, but you can visualize these, you can picture these can motivate employees and donors and clients and such to get behind this mission. So that's MAD's mission. American Red Cross's mission will provide relief to victims of disasters and to help prevent, prepare for, and respond to emergencies. Again, it's not very, very specific, but it's feasible, it's motivating, it's something that people can kind of visualize in terms of what they do. YMCA's mission is to put Christian principles into practice through programs that build healthy spirit, mind, and body for all. Another example, General Electric. So this is outside of the realm of a nonprofit, but in a for-profit situation, General Electric's mission is to invent the next industrial era, to build, move, power, and cure the world. Okay, so again, we're not talking objectives, we're not talking specific goals. An overly vague mission, however, does not help us at all. So if there was an organization out there who had a mission that was simply to improve the lives of America's poor, and that was it, then that might be, that's vague. I mean, that's not very specific. It doesn't really motivate. It's not something that we're, it's too non-specific. So again, those missions need to provide some level of foundation, if you will, for everybody to be able to follow and move forward with. Okay, so organizational objectives then. If we know what we want to do from a mission perspective, what is an objective? An objective should not conflict with the mission, and they should indicate success towards completing the mission. So if I have a list of objectives, the objectives then should support the mission of the organization, maybe in more detail, maybe some specific steps, if you will, or characteristics that would lead to the organizational support of the mission. And then at the same time, they're going to have to be things that could be translated into goals as well, because we want to be able to measure goals that lead us towards the objectives. The objectives ultimately, though, support the mission of the organization. So objectives should be more specific than the mission, yet still broader in focus with keeping the outcomes in mind, which will be the goals that we have. Here's just some simply stated objectives. Be a market share leader. Increase national reputation. Expand our donor base. Be the first choice care option for post-operation, post-op physical therapy. Now, if you think about all of these things, could you have a measure that's associated with them? And those measures then would be things that we translate into goals. But these themselves are not specific enough to be goals. They're not identifying a specific metric. Be the market share leader means that we'll have a greater market share than others or our competitors that are out there, or we'll serve more people or a greater percentage of the market or clients out there, but it doesn't specify exactly what that number is. It doesn't specify a timeline or anything along those lines. Okay, so again, organizational objectives then these are all support the mission of the organization, but not be so specific that we would chart them on a monthly basis. Those would be things that we would do with organizational goals. So goals then are generally based on measured performance indicators. So we need to have a specific metric or a measure then that will help us reflect progress we're making towards accomplishing the specific goal that we have in mind. Be the market share leader. Currently we have 18% market share. Our goal is to increase market share by 5% this year, and that will help us become closer to being the market share leader, or it may actually extend our market share leader position if we're already the market share. But these are specific measurable elements. Increase national reputation. Survey results indicate that 72% of people are familiar with our brand. 65% have a very favorable impression of it. Our goal is to increase awareness to 75% and our favorability to 70%. So again, you see that we have a measurable goal that supports an objective that we've set out for. Expand our donor base. Here's another objective type of a thing, and we're going to translate that into a goal. Currently, we have 2,450 donors located in the St. Louis, Missouri area. Our goal is to grow to 3,000 donors, including growth into the East St. Louis, Illinois area. Okay, so this one here, it kind of delineates the growth in the number of donors. It also specifies where we expect that growth to be in. So these are good goals. These are good goals to have. We can map these out. We can identify whether we're making progress to the goals. If we're not making progress to the goals, then we can adapt our plan to better reach those goals. If it looks like we're going to overshoot a goal and we're going to maybe achieve that goal earlier, we can even adjust it and make that goal higher if we need to in the monitoring stage of the planning process. Okay, so goals then are measurable elements that we're going to look at that support objectives and the mission. A last element that I want to mention here before we go too far away is this idea of organizational culture. So organizational culture is another piece of the broadest level of planning, and it's a context in which we do our planning and our thinking. Organizational culture can be a very, very important factor in terms of forming our mission objectives and our goals. So the mission often is a reflection of the leaders and the people and the culture, right? The culture of the organization and what the culture wants to emulate or influence. So when we think about mission objectives and goals, we should also take a step back and think that these are being formed within the culture of the organization. This is actually a really important thing when you think about human resources. And when you bring new people into an organization, you want to ensure that they are meshing on a cultural level as well as a functional level so they can perform the job they're being hired to do, but they also share the same values that the organization does from an organizational perspective. Successful culture is strong, dominant, and pervasive. It's directed towards the marketplace or the client's needs, or it could be directed towards the donor's needs and the services that we provide society overall. So culture plays a significant role in identifying the mission, objective, and goals of the organization because it's strong, dominant, and pervasive. One caution or warning, cultural conflict warning: when a nonprofit looks to operate more like a for-profit, internal conflict may emerge when there is a stress between having a corporate versus a nonprofit culture. So this is one of the challenges that we're going to face and talk about throughout a lot of this type of topic is that when an organization wants to run like a business, it often employs business-minded employees. And, sometimes people feel like a nonprofit should not look or run or operate like a for-profit. So a nonprofit, it has a different mission and it has a different kind of objective in terms of what it wants to accomplish. And sometimes there's this perception that because it's a nonprofit, it shouldn't operate as if it were a for-profit organization. And so one of the challenges here is to run a nonprofit well, use proper organizational management techniques, but do so by maintaining its corporate culture or its culture of nonprofit, kind of emphasis. So the challenge though is to think that you can have a business-minded outlook, but you can still have a nonprofit mission. I mean, these things are not mutually exclusive, like you'd have one or the other. Really, you'd have both. And in fact, many of the large nonprofits are so big, they're run like businesses. They're operated like businesses. They're operated like you would expect a Fortune 500 company to be. Just because they're a nonprofit doesn't mean they have income, they have bills to pay, they have expenses, they have investments. So to distinguish between the two is sometimes a bit of a challenge, and it truly can lead to what we call this cultural conflict within the organization. So be aware of that and just ponder that and think about how bringing in people from with different cultural backgrounds, in terms of business, look or nonprofit kind of thinking, can create some type of a conflict within the organization. Okay, so summaries to wrap this up. We talked a little bit at the beginning of marketing's purpose, which is to influence behavior. We talked about an overall broad planning model that has 3 separate stages. Today, however, we just simply looked at the organizational level, and specifically, we only looked at mission, objectives, and goals. We talked a little bit about organizational culture. and how that is the basis then which forms missions, objectives, and goals. And then finally, made a few notes and talked a little bit about cultural conflicts and how that is kind of a challenge with nonprofits in particular who want to start acting like for-profits in how they actually function. Okay, so if you have any questions, please reach out to me. Look forward to hearing from you. Again, thanks for listening to this video voiceover on the PowerPoint, and I hope you have a fantastic day.